So this is the third Sierra Club dinner in the series, the John Muir series, Answering the Call of Life, focusing on the predicament of abrupt climate change and solutions. So tonight we are very fortunate to have with us Professor Mark Jacobson from Stanford University, who is the director of the Atmosphere Energy Program at Stanford. So in one expert, you have both the atmosphere side and the energy side, focusing on renewables. So really a rare combination. Mark is extremely accomplished. It would take me half an hour just to go over his resume alone. But one of the things I wanted to point out is he, along with experts from the private sector and even from culture, entertainment, have created a project called the Solutions Project, focusing on solutions to climate change, which is what we absolutely need with tremendous urgency. So after Mark talks from 8 to 9, then Professor Lucia Garces-Lohmann, if you raise your hand, she and I and Dr. Mark DeLucci from Berkeley, both Lucia and Mark are from Berkeley, the two of them and I will co-lead the after-dinner discussion. Professor Mark Jacobson has an early flight tomorrow morning, so he's going to have to drive all the way back down to the Silicon Valley tonight, get a few hours sleep, and get on a plane. So he won't be able to stay for the long after-hours discussion, but I hope all of you will. And very fortunately, Dr. Mark DeLucci and Professor Mark Jacobson, have co-authored a number of papers together. So Dr. DeLucci will be able to represent much of that work. So without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Professor Mark Jacobson.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and really happy to be here and talk about our vision. And I do want to say our vision, Mark DeLucci has been with me in all these papers, all the research I'm going to talk about, we co-authored together, along with also a bunch of students too, and some others. And anyway, this is our vision for trying to transform the energy infrastructure of states and countries and cities and towns and even individual houses to 100% clean renewable energy for all purposes. And that's to address global warming, air pollution, and energy security. So why do we care about these problems? Well, from my point of view, I mean, when I was young, when I was a teenager, in fact, I wanted to try to solve or understand air pollution, urban air pollution in particular. I went down to Los Angeles and San Diego a few times, and the pollution was just horrendous. I thought, why should people live like this? So I tried to address this in my career. I wanted to try to understand and solve these problems. So air pollution worldwide causes 4 to 7 million premature deaths each year, and 20% of these are children under the age of 5 years old. And so this is an avoidable problem caused almost exclusively by human emissions of fossil fuels and biofuels from combustion, most of it for energy. And then climate change is a significant and growing problem, and it's expected to overtake even air pollution in its cost within 20 years. But by 2050, we estimate between 25 and $30 trillion per year the cost of climate change due to all sorts of problems that I don't have time to go into. But the other issue is energy security. When there are limited resources, fossil fuels are limited resources, they will run out in some time. And when that happens, you're going to have more economic, social, and political instability. So what's our idea? It's really to transition the whole energy infrastructure, all parts of energy, including electricity, transportation, heating, cooling, industry, agriculture, forestry, and fishing. The idea is to electrify everything and then provide that electricity with clean, renewable energy. So for example, with transportation, we'd go to battery electric vehicles and some hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, mostly for long distance ships, trains, and aircraft. But battery electric for pretty much everything. For heating, cooling, we'd use heat pumps mostly. Heat pumps are much more efficient than even electric resistance heaters, but especially also gas heaters. So I'll discuss that in a little bit. For industry, we'd use existing electrical technologies to replace high temperature industrial processes, and I'll show you some examples. Then we're going to provide all that electricity with just wind and water and solar, onshore and offshore wind, solar photovoltaics on rooftops and in power plants, concentrated solar power, and also some geothermal power, existing hydroelectric power, and tiny amounts of tidal wave. And we'll try to get all our energy for everything from those sources. So a lot has happened in the last few years. They're now, I'm going to go show some examples of existing technologies that are electric and hydrogen fuel cell. So you've probably all seen the Tesla semi-electric truck. And Nikola also has a semi that these are planning to go long distances, and there have been many orders for them. They're existing technologies. Buses are now widespread. I mean, China has, I don't know what the number is, just like tens of thousands of buses they've been or they've just been putting on the street over the last several months, in fact. And the oil companies are concerned that their oil demand is going to go down because of all these electric buses that are going in. And then hydrogen fuel cell, electric hybrid buses are also existing technologies. For aircraft, that's probably the hardest to transition, but there are prototypes around. There are several companies that are producing electric aircraft. On the left is an electric aircraft that's battery electric. On the bottom right is a 4-seat hydrogen fuel cell aircraft that can go up to 1,500 kilometers. On the top right is a drawing for a cryogenic aircraft. Well, cryogenic is when you have hydrogen at very low temperature and high pressure. You need a larger volume for the aircraft fuselage, but since hydrogen weighs less, there's less drag. And hydrogen has been used to propel most rockets and the space shuttles into space, so it's an existing technology, although we want to use it in a fuel cell for long-distance aircraft. But the aircraft companies are most likely to resist for a while, so we don't expect that to transition to maybe 2035, 2040. But there are replacements being developed for helicopters even. So this is a vertical takeoff and landing flight aircraft, kind of aircraft, I guess. It's existing technology that's being tested currently. Now, just your ordinary daily appliances that you might use. Well, everybody uses an electric lift, but there are now electric versions of most everything. There are lawnmowers and leaf blowers. In fact, these leaf blowers they're just as inexpensive or the same cost as regular leaf blowers that run on gasoline, but they're not as noisy, and they also don't pollute so much. Then we have also arc furnaces and dielectric heaters, induction furnaces for high temperature industrial processing. So these are all existing technologies. So again, I want to impress upon you that the idea is to just really electrify everything, take every source of fossil fuels and replace it with an electric equivalent as much as you can. And so another thing that's been going on is the transition offshore. Right now, one of the limitations for offshore wind was the fact that you needed to put the turbine pole into the ground, into the ocean floor. But now we have floating offshore wind turbines, and there are several farms cropping up already around the world for floating offshore. And this really opens up offshore wind to a much larger scale. To give you an example, the west coast of California, well, the California coast and along the west coast, it's very deep water pretty quickly. So there's not a lot of places you could put offshore wind turbines that go right into the ocean floor. But with floating offshore, then you can open up this huge wind resource, because the greatest wind resource in the world is really offshore, and offshore of the U.S. in particular, East Coast and West Coast, just incredible resources. So you can power the entire U.S., in fact, with just the offshore wind if you could capture it. But you don't need just wind. You combine it with solar and these other technologies that we've discussed. And floating offshore solar is another technology that is growing, especially in places that are island countries or countries that are coastal that are very land constrained, such as Singapore. And there are many countries around the world. Japan is actually putting in lots of floating solar as well. China has them all over lakes. Okay, so what can we do? Well, I want to talk a little bit about storage, because the wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. So there are many technologies that you can actually use to try to solve the problem of intermittency. And I'll discuss that with some results later, but I just want to introduce introduce some of these technologies and show you some examples. Well, for electricity, aside from batteries, which everybody's heard of, there's concentrated solar power, which has storage associated. Just to remind you, concentrated solar power, you have light focusing off of mirrors onto a central tower to heat a fluid. The fluid can then be stored in a tank overnight, and then when you need electricity, you pipe the fluid by water to heat the water to create steam, to run a steam turbine to generate electricity. So you can run solar 24 hours a day with concentrated solar power. But the difference is concentrated solar power, the storage component costs between $20 and $30 a kilowatt hour of storage, whereas a battery is like $200 to $300 a kilowatt hour of storage. So it's cheaper for the storage component. Pumped hydroelectric is also less than $40 a kilowatt hour. That's where you have two reservoirs, a lower and an upper one. When you have excess electricity, then you pump water up a hill. When you need electricity, you let the water drain down a hill and run a turbine to generate electricity. Then there's existing hydroelectric dams. Existing dams, they run on hydro by just water gravitationally falling and passing through a turbine to generate electricity. And then batteries. So then heating, cooling, water, ice, and rocks. And I'll show you some pictures of that in a second, so I'm not going to go into any detail right now. And then also hydrogen I mentioned, which is used primarily for transportation. It's a form of storage. And then we'll use also demand response, is where utilities give people incentives to use electricity at certain times of the day. Like if they have a lower charging rate after 11 p.m. so that you can charge your car, that's demand response. So here's an example. Well, Stanford University had a big ice cube under a building from 1998 to 2015. And so at night, when the electricity price was low, they'd use the electricity to produce ice. And it was stored there until the daytime. So during the day, instead of running air conditioning in the afternoon, say in the summer, which used electricity at the peak time, they would then run water through the coils in the ice like this. And the water is then sent to buildings to cool the buildings. And so this saved a huge amount of energy and cost in particular, but it reduces. It's like a battery because it basically avoids the use of electricity for air conditioning in the afternoon. But this costs about $37 a kilowatt hour versus a battery, which is about $300 at the time, or $400 at the time. Now, rocks. So this is a field I visited in Okotoks, Canada, which is an hour south of Calgary. And under this field, the field had been excavated in 2005 and filled with a bunch of rocks and covered up, and now it's a play field. But there were 52 homes built at that time. Well, on the garages, there were solar collectors that had a glycol solution in them. And then during the summer, when the days were long, the sun would heat the glycol solution. The solution was then piped to this building, the brick building, where the heat was transferred to water. The water was then piped underground and passed by the rocks and heated the rocks up to 80 degrees Celsius. And the rocks are insulated around them, and that heat was stored until winter time. And the whole system was run in reverse and has provided every year 100% of the heating for these 52 homes. But this costs less than $1 a kilowatt hour of storage for the rock portions. So it's a form of district heating. I mean, district heating is actually very common in Europe, but not with rocks underground, more with water and over a shorter time scale. This is seasonal heat storage, so you can actually store the energy for 6 months or so. And the overall efficiency from summer to winter is around 57%. In other words, 57% of the energy from the sun coming in the summer actually goes back and is used in the winter. So it's actually a huge loss. 43% is not the thing to write home about, but it's so cheap that you can afford to lose it. There's a question back here?
Under this field, are those rocks over there or something like that? Is
Yeah,
there-
under this grassy field, yeah.
Oh, and that picture to the left is not anything?
Oh, the picture to the bottom left is the snow on the ground
Oh, okay. But
of the
it's-
homes.
Okay, so the rocks are under there.
Yeah, this is just a play field. It's surrounded by homes, so kids play on it. I couldn't even tell I was there until I
Very cool.
went to the building and figured it out. Okay. So then this is one other type of storage thing. So Stanford, up until a couple of years ago, had a big natural gas cogeneration plant right outside my window, and it would provide 80% of the electricity and heat for the campus. But it bulldozed that 2 years ago and replaced it with these two boilers and a chiller. and 50 megawatts of solar. And so what this diagram shows on the right is that any time during the year, there's both cold demand and heat demand. So this is from left to right is from January to December. And the light blue shows the cold demand, which peaks in the summer. And the light red shows the heat demand. And the shading part is, well, whenever you produce cold, you release heat. And when you produce heat, you release cold. And so normally that's wasted. But if they actually recapture that now, the waste heat and the waste cold, and send it to these water tanks and store the heat and the cold in the respective water tanks, and then ship it around the university. That just saves a huge amount of energy. And that, plus the 50 megawatts of solar, replace this natural gas cogen plant, and the lights stay on. And they're trying to figure out ways to now get rid of the last 20%, which they get from the grid. So they're actually 80% carbon free, which is pretty good. They might actually, if they actually pass, theoretically they could become 100% within the next couple of years. And the next closest, I think there's a University of Hawaii who wants to go to 100%. Their data is like 2027 or something like that. Okay, so what about an individual home? So I built a new home last year, or finished it last year, and tried to make it so it's zero net energy and no gas. So there's no gas on the property. I just want to show you some of the things, because really after this experience, it's so efficient, and it's very comfortable too, but also the costs are pretty reasonable, and they pay themselves off, I think, over about 6 years. Now, most of the devices I'm going to show you are just the same cost as an equivalent gas or something else, but you also will end up saving money in other things. For example, because I had no gas on the property, I did not have to pay a hookup fee to PG&E for gas, which was on its own $6,000 to $7,000. Plus there are no pipes either, which save money. But on the left here is an air source heat pump water heater, and it extracts heat out of the room. It's in a mechanical room, and it extracts heat out of that room and transfers the heat to the water to heat the water. But it just runs on electricity, and it's pretty simple. I actually just ordered it online, and it showed up, and the plumber installed it. And it works really well. In fact, it expels cold to this room. Not a lot of cold, it's just a little colder than the room outside. So in the summer, I can open the door and then cool down the rest of the house, so that saves a little bit more. On the right are air source heat pump, air heaters, and air conditioner. Well, there's one of these in each zone of the house. And the way this works, it's a heat pump. By the way, heat pumps, they use 1/4 the energy as either a gas heater or an electric resistance heater. Because they don't create heat or cold, they move it. And so they actually use much less energy. So for example, there's an outside unit for this right, this mini split, it's called a mini split ductless heat pump, air conditioner and air heater. There's an outside unit where, okay, so let's say the room is hot and you want to cool it down. So there's a copper pipe that has a coolant in it that goes to this unit from the outside. And so there's a fan inside this unit. The fan blows the hot air over the coolant, and the coolant extracts the heat and sends the heat outside. And where the heat is expelled outside, and the resulting cold air from that blew over the coolant is then expelled to the room. So that's air conditioning. And you can do the opposite for heating, where you blow cold air from the room over the coolant, and the coolant will absorb the cold or expel heat to the air and send that heat to the room. So it's really efficient. It just moves heat from the outside of the house to the inside, and it uses 1/4 the energy as either an electric resistance heater or a gas heater. Now, induction cooktop stove, this is just a replacement for a gas stove, and people don't like electric resistance stoves because electric resistance stoves tend to you can't control the heat very well, and they don't heat up so fast. So this boils water in half the time as a gas stove. And then when you touch the stovetop, you won't feel any heat, because what it does is you have to have certain pots that have iron or stainless steel on the bottom. And what they do is it excites electrons in the iron or stainless steel, so it heats up the pot, but not the stove. Normally when you have a stove, the stove gets hot. In this case, the pot gets hot, and so when you touch the stove, it's still cold. But anyway, it's really efficient, and you can control the heat extremely well. It costs about the same as a gas stove. for getting power to the house, so solar, and then there are batteries in the garage. And actually, PG&E only let me turn on 2 of these 4 batteries. So I guess when the first two run out, I can turn the other 2 on for me. But actually, it turns out I only need 2 for most purposes. So the solar is providing all the energy for the house pretty much, except I'm still connected to the grid because when I'm charging cars, as I'll show you in a second, then the peak draw rate is too fast, and so you need some grid electricity. But overall, I just finished, well, at the end of this month, I'll have finished 1 full year of the solar being turned on. And so far, I've generated 20% more electricity than I've used. In fact, I signed up with PG&E is my underlying utility, but now you have an option to go to what's called community choice for paying for the generation portion of your bill. The generation being like you could pick solar or wind or whatever. So Silicon Valley Clean Energy is the overlying utility, and it's a community choice utility that will pay up to the peak time of use for your electricity that you generate above and beyond what you use during the year. PG&E, on the other hand, will pay only 2 cents a kilowatt hour if you generate more than you use. But Silicon Valley Clean Energy and other community choices will pay up to 25 cents a kilowatt hour. So they actually just sent me a check that I got the other day for $530 for the last year, which was good because I had no electricity bill, plus I got paid for it, which was nice. But so then there are a couple electric cars that charge, and so there's no gasoline bill either because the solar from the roof is powering these electric cars as well. So that's included in this cost savings, the savings of gasoline. So let me just show you 1 week of electricity use, and of course a new home can be very energy efficient, especially with new codes that prevent energy from leaving the house. So you have to have a certain amount of sealing of the home. But this is a week in summer. So the green is solar photovoltaic production, and the light blue is the use in the home from either directly from the photovoltaics. Well, that's what happens. First, you use directly from the photovoltaics to power whatever's needed in the home. If there's not enough photovoltaic electricity, then you use the batteries. And if there's not enough battery electricity, then you use the grid. Conversely, the first thing that happens in the morning after the sun is used to power household equipment is to fill up the battery. So every night, or every day, or well, it's really every night the battery gets drained, and then every morning it gets filled up again. So that's what on the bottom is. You can see the battery going down and up. And it only goes down to 50% because the other 2 batteries are not being used. And so it's going from 100% to 50% and back up again. So there are 2 times during this that you can see there are big red spikes, and that's when grid electricity is being used. And that's when I'm charging these cars. And during that time, either the battery's already run out or been used all the way, or the peak discharge rate of the battery is not enough because the 2 batteries each are 3.3 kilowatts of discharge. So 2 of them are 6.6 kilowatts, and that Tesla Model S requires 20 kilowatts of discharge, whereas the other one requires 10 kilowatts. So both of them, they're not enough to provide the electricity for charging the cars. But even during this period, this week, you might not be able to see it, but actually 50% of all the electricity produced by the solar was sent back to the grid, and the other 50% was used. So it had net production of 50%.
Mark?
Yeah.
What was, just past the midline there, there's the tall red again, used from grid, what was that because?
Oh, because I was charging the card.
Okay.
That was the car charging.
I just had a quick question.
Yeah.
Why did PG&E not allow you to turn on the other 2 batteries?
Okay, they have an esoteric rule that if you have an inverter size that's larger than 10 kilowatts, then they have to be able to measure the solar directly, because both the solar and the battery are connected to the inverter. And they only have a meter outside the house, basically, that's measuring the net. And so because if it's a greater than 10 kilowatts, they claim that they have to measure the solar directly in the inverter, and they say they can't do that. They don't know how to do it.
Ah.
Wasn't it partly though that you would be making money, and they knew that you were already using from your 2 what you needed, and the rest would be coming?
Now there is a specific rule that they lobbied for, that they conveniently had to.
It does seem that those red spikes would be reduced if you did have those other 2 batteries
Oh,
online.
for sure.
You know?
Yeah, they would. It wouldn't be eliminated, but they're,
Yeah.
well, the second one would be, but not the first one.
Yeah.
But it turns out that actually it's okay because most of the time I use the batteries. Well, so if you look at the peak times of the peak rates, there's a peak between 3 and 9 p.m. is when they have the highest electricity prices. And then like 9 to 11 is the second, and then after 11 is the cheapest. So the batteries actually turn on right after sunset. So let's say it's 7 o'clock or something, 7 to 11, then I can use the battery for most of my purposes. But if I had 2 more batteries turned on, it would be running after 11 p.m., which is when the electricity price is cheapest. So I'm actually using the medium price to fill the battery during the morning.
It's pretty efficient even with the 2 batteries.
Yeah.
You actually have a pretty good.
Yeah, the 2 batteries actually, for this, except in winter time, then it becomes, the 4 batteries could be useful then. Okay, so let's jump to, can we actually power the whole world with 100% clean renewable energy for all purposes? So we did these plans for 139 countries looking at this question, and those, we didn't do all 200 countries because there are just some countries, mostly smaller countries, that didn't have data, we didn't have data for, but these countries represent about 99% of all the emissions. So the 2012 end-use power demand for all purposes was about, from all these countries, and this is for all sectors, was around 12.1 trillion watts, or terawatts. This is average power demand over the year. It's expected to go up to 2050 to about 21.6 or 20.6 terawatts. But it turns out if we electrify everything and provide that electricity with just clean renewable energy, well, if we don't use heat pumps, we can go down to about 11.8 terawatts, around 43%. But if we add in heat pumps for everything that requires heating or cooling, for low temperature heating and cooling, then we can go down to a total of 58% reduction of power demand. So how does that break down? I mean, how can we get 58% reduction? This is without even changing your habits, really. 23% is due to the efficiency of electricity over combustion. So for example, an electric car, 80 to 86% of the electricity in the car goes to move the car, and the rest is waste heat. Whereas a gasoline car, about 17 to 20% of the energy in the gasoline is used to move the car, and the rest is waste heat. So just by going from an electric car or gasoline car to an electric car, you reduce your demand for energy in the transportation sector on the order of 70–75%. But if you average over all sectors, there's not as much benefit in the other sectors. So it's about 23% over all energy sectors. And then 12.6% of all energy worldwide is used to mine, transport, and refine fossil fuels. And so when we have wind and solar, the wind comes right to the turbine, the solar comes right to the panel. And so you eliminate 13% of all energy worldwide just by eliminating mining, transporting, refining the fuels. And then heat pumps, you get another 16% reduction of energy use. And 6.9% is just end-use energy efficiency improvements beyond business as usual that are due to more efficient appliances, telecommuting, more bike riding, and just normal things that we think of as energy efficiency or reducing energy use. So this is just one way, summed over all 139 countries that we looked at, to provide that electricity to power everything. Be 23.5% onshore wind, 14% offshore wind, 16% residential rooftop photovoltaics, another 12% commercial government rooftop photovoltaics, 20% utility scale PV, CSP plants around 10%, about 1% geothermal, 4% hydro. Now the right column is the number of new devices, and you can see it's 0 for hydro. That's because we're not adding any new dams in our plans, just using existing hydro. And then we have a small amount of tidal and wave power. But the total number of wind turbines is around 2.6 million. That's worldwide. And you might think, okay, that's a lot. Well, just think in the United States alone, there are 1.7 million natural gas, oil and gas wells that are active, and another 2.3 million inactive ones. So 4 million gas wells and oil wells in the US alone. They take up between 1 and 2% of the US land infrastructure due to the well pads, the roads, the storage facilities. So that's not even counting coal mines or refineries or pipelines or anything else. It's just the the well pads and the roads around them. And so we don't think the land area required for these plans worldwide, about 0.2%, 0.22% of the world's land for what we call footprint. That's mostly for utility scale photovoltaics and concentrated solar power, and another 0.92% for onshore wind. Because rooftop photovoltaics doesn't take up new land, hardly any new geothermal, no new hydropower, and the rest is offshore. So offshore wind and tidal and wave. So 1.14% of the world's land for this whole endeavor, and most of that spacing between wind turbines that can be used for multiple purposes, such as rangeland, cropland, farmland, or open space. Now, okay, so the question I asked earlier is, well, can we keep the grid stable with just clean renewable energy? Because the wind doesn't always blow, the sun does not always shine. And so we did recently, we broke up these 139 countries into 20 world regions. And we did grid stability analyses in each of these regions with 3 different scenarios. And we call them scenario A, B, and C. And they're mostly storage scenarios. So like in case A, we included batteries, CSP storage, heat and cold storage, no heat pumps, no additional hydropower turbines to existing dams. We had pumped hydro storage, and we had some hydrogen for transportation. And then case B, no batteries. We did have CSP storage, heat cold storage, but no heat pumps. But we did add hydropower turbines to existing dams in that case, but without increasing the dam size or the average flow rate, just to increase the peak discharge rate. To get those peaks, like I just showed you with the cars in the garage, you get these huge peaks. So that's the key that we're trying to get at. That's why we want to add hydropower turbines. But in case C, we have battery, CSP storage, no heat or cold storage at all, but we have heat pumps, and no additional hydropower turbines, but we have pumped hydro and hydrogen. Now, the overall cost in all cases was pretty similar. The cost of energy, about 10.6, 10.7 cents a kilowatt hour. And we reduced power demand between 42 and 58%, with the 58% being with the heat pumps in addition. So keep in mind that even if the cost per kilowatt hour is the same, when you're using less energy, the consumer pays less, proportionally less dollars. So this will be important. So I just want to show you a sampling of the results for all 20 world regions. So I'll start with here. So we matched, so ran a climate model to predict the winds and solar fields every 30 seconds for 5 years, from 2050 to 2054. And then compared that over the 5 years for each world region to the power demand and changes in storage. So I'm just going to show 30 days every hour for each of these places. This is for North America, US and Canada. And the red is energy supply, the blue is demand plus changes in storage, plus losses, plus shedding. And what this shows is that supply is matching demand exactly. In fact, it matches exactly every 30 seconds for 5 years without any loss of load. This is for case A, but it matched it for all cases that we tried. So this is North America, this is Central America, with the same result, Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic, so it worked on islands as well as continents, Jamaica, South America, New Zealand, Australia, Southeast Asia, the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, China, Hong Kong, Mongolia, North Korea, Russia, Georgia, India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, Central Asia, the Middle East, Europe, Iceland, and Africa. So this is 139 countries. We were able to keep the grid stable, and this is the overall cost of energy. Well, if we just look at the fossil fuel cost of energy first, in the electric power sector, fast forwarded to 2050, but brought back to today's dollars, is about 9.8 cents a kilowatt hour, but there's a health cost of almost 13 cents a kilowatt hour from the air pollution, mortality, and morbidity. And then the climate cost, another 16 cents a kilowatt hour. So 38 cents a kilowatt hour. For the same electricity sector, but converted to wind, water, solar, it's 9.7 cents a kilowatt hour. But there's no health or climate cost. And for all energy with wind, water, solar, not just the original electric power sector, but all sectors, it's about 10.6. But broke out the electric power sector to compare with the fossil fuels. So the fossil fuel cost of electricity directly is pretty similar, but it's 1/4 the social cost, which is the cost of the electricity plus the health plus the climate cost. Plus, there's 43 to 58% less energy used. So really it's 1/8 the cost of a fossil fuel system in terms of the social cost and 1/2 the cost in terms of the energy cost for a wind, water, solar system compared to the fossil fuel system. Okay, so finally, well, sorry, not finally. I can't say finally. A couple more tidbits here. So one of the things we did is in this climate model, that I added this feature where we can extract when we're producing winds, because the climate model will predict the winds everywhere around the world. But I put turbines in the model, and then whenever the wind is blowing past the turbine extracts energy from the wind and converts it to electricity. So it slows down the wind slightly. So it turns out that by slowing down the wind, and the amount of wind slowdown is on the order, it's just where the turbines, I mean worldwide it doesn't have a big impact on the winds with all these turbines. But what it does is it reduces the wind speed downwind of the turbines, and that reduces evaporation. And water vapor is the main natural greenhouse gas. And it turns out that by reducing water evaporation, you offset some of the water that's evaporated due to global warming. Because global warming, you have CO2, that induces more evaporation of ocean water, etc. So you actually offset about 3% of global warming just by putting these wind turbines in, which reduce water vapor emissions.
Mark,
Yeah.
are you, for your models, are you using typical meteorological year of currently, or are you extrapolating into different weather patterns out to 2050?
This is 2050. So I actually had the CO2 levels at 2050 levels. So yeah, everything is projected.
Storms of our grandchildren and all that kind of thing too? In terms of larger storms and greater droughts and greater floods, that sort of
Well,
thing?
yeah, this is a full climate model, has everything in it, so it should predict whatever's there. No, I mean, it's not going to be exact, obviously, because there's a lot of uncertainty, but it's representing in general. But the bottom line is, so these wind turbines are not only reducing electricity use, or fossil fuel electricity use, but they're actually reducing on their own global warming, which is an important conclusion. The other issue is, well, with these wind, water, solar plans, our goal is to go 80% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. Will this actually reduce CO2 levels to 350 parts per million? Because that's kind of the goal. Now, this shows model predictions from 1750 to 2100 of CO2 in the atmosphere, the global atmosphere. And the red dots are the data between 1750 and 2015. And the model is matching those really well. But then there are a bunch of future scenarios here. And most of them are IPCC scenarios, which assume very large emissions of CO2 going into the future. But let's start at the bottom here. The green line is if you eliminated all emissions in 2015. That shows that you can get, that's the maximum reduction of CO2 you can get, which is below 350 parts per million. The blue line is our roadmaps, which is 80% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. That results in a 350 parts per million by 2100. And then the black line is 80% by 2050 and 100% by 2100. And the rest are the IPCC scenarios, which are pretty grim. So anyway, the point is, if you actually do this transition, there's a possibility we could get it in. Yeah.
And on a couple of slides back where you had the stability in different places, Southeast Asia and whatnot, where is the population reduction increasing factored in or not factored in?
Yeah, we accounted for increases of population in all of these countries of the world.
Steady state as we have been.
Yeah, well, we used other studies, population growth, and we also accounted for energy efficiency improvements in the system as well. Okay, and then some interesting stuff. Well, what are people doing, and what do people think about going to clean renewable energy? So most recently, or pretty recently, there was a public opinion survey by Ørsted, which looked at 13 countries, 26,000 people. And what was fascinating was the poll resulted in, it says 82% of people want 100% renewable energy, according to this poll, which is way more than actually believe in climate change, which is pretty sad. Only 66% believe that climate change is a pressing international problem. But one of the reasons more people believed in renewable energy than climate change was because people think that it can lead to energy independence and boost economic growth. There are other reasons people can believe in climate change. So this is all fine because as long as we're solving the problem, that's really what we want to focus on. So if you go for renewable energy and you don't believe in climate change, okay, fine. It's still helping to solve the problem. And there's another poll here that's very consistent. This is a poll that was in the US, only been for several different states. And nationwide, 64% of the people strongly believed that we should power the US with entirely clean and renewable energy. Another 19% somewhat supported that. So about 83%, which is very consistent with the 82% in the other poll. But it varies by state. Some states are more proactive than others. But still, this is pretty encouraging. Now, what's going on in terms of policies? Well, there are actually 5 laws that have been, or resolutions that have been proposed in Congress. 3 in the House and 2 in the Senate, including 3 bills. I only listed 4 out of the 5 here. But these are for the United States to go to 100% clean renewable energy. They have co-sponsors, but they haven't been voted upon for reasons pretty obvious. But anyway, so they are pending to be waiting to be voted on. But they, there's, like the Senate bill says, a bill to transition away from fossil fuels to 100% clean and renewable energy by 2050. So this is encouraging. There are a lot of states that have passed laws or proposed laws in one or more electric power, or one or more sectors. So New York has now a 50% clean renewable energy standard for the electric power sector, so does California. California has a pending SB 100 bill to go 100% in the electric power sector. Washington State has a pending bill to go what they call carbon-free electricity by 2045. Hawaii has a 100% renewable law on the books by 2045. Massachusetts has a 100% clean renewable energy proposed law for all energy sectors by 2050. And there's actually a few more, like Vermont has a 75% law on the books, and New Jersey just passed one as well that was low carbon. But in addition to those states, there are now many cities and towns across America, North America, and well, also around the world. But these are just cities in North America, some of them that have committed to 100% clean renewable energy, including Atlanta, Georgia, Madison, Wisconsin, Portland, Oregon, St. Louis, Missouri, St. Petersburg, Florida. Actually, just 2 days ago, Norman, Oklahoma, first city in Oklahoma, passed it. And we had 12 towns and counties in North Carolina alone, including Boone and Sylva, North Carolina, and Watauga County. And there's also Avita Springs, Louisiana, and Moab, Utah. So there's all over the place. There are towns and cities that have committed to this. And there are over 130 international companies, including the largest companies of the world, have committed to 100% clean renewable energy, including, well, not only Google and Apple, which Google claimed they went to 100% last year, and Apple claimed it a few weeks ago. But you can see many of the major companies of the world have made this commitment. And the key is to actually get them to do it right away and to get their supply chain as well. So there's a long way to go, but still this is encouraging. And then there are lots of nonprofits, including the Sierra Club, which has really taken on the campaign to working to get these cities and towns on board with these commitments. So this is great that the Sierra Club has taken this on. And our own solutions project and 100.org have been really trying to galvanize lots of these other nonprofits as well. But it's really a group effort. We can't do it individually. First of all, nobody listens to scientists. And so we need all sorts of people to groups to really support this effort and to actually get out on the ground. So this is why the Sierra Club, in fact, has been amazing in really getting things going in these towns and cities in particular. So just to summarize, I didn't talk about jobs, but worldwide we found from our studies that we could create 24 million net jobs minus loss worldwide, and in the US about 2 million. These are long-term full-time jobs, not just temporary construction jobs. We would require only about 0.22% of the world's land for footprints and 1.15% total, including spacing. And we'd say 4 to 7 million air pollution deaths per year. We slow down and eventually reverse global warming. We think the grids can stay stable at low cost throughout the world. And the cost per kilowatt hour of wind, water, solar just for the electricity would be slightly less than fossil fuels, although pretty close. But we'd have 1/4 the social cost per unit energy and 1/8 the social cost per consumer, because they each pay they're using 1/2 the energy. And then transitioning to all energy sectors to wind, water, solar, we think it's technically and economically possible. There are social and political barriers still. The solution does require collective willpower, but we need immediate deployment. I mean, we can't just dawdle our thumbs and wait around another 5, 10 years. This is really important to address right away. So if you want more information, including slides that are similar to this, or if you're interested in these slides, I can certainly send them to you, or send them to somebody if you want to email me. And there are websites that have the roadmaps, all the papers that we've written on this subject. Also, there are infographic maps of each country of the world and each state at thesolutionsproject.org. And thank you very much. Answer any other questions?
Cost of carbon fuels, what's the price per CO2 per ton? Or is there assuming that there's any cost to that, or is that expected to be zero?
Well, are you talking about the price on the market today, or what we think is the social cost of CO2 per
Yeah,
ton?
over time, such as comparing fossil fuel price approximately with clean energy.
Well, we evaluated, Mark can speak better to this, but we evaluated that in 2050, the social cost to be up to $500.
But, which is certainly correct, but that wouldn't reflect the 9.7, I think it was cents a kilowatt hour, would it?
No, that's in the climate cost, the 15.8 cents a kilowatt hour.
Okay.
That's
I see.
where that
Thank
is.
you.
Yeah, the 9.7 is just the electric hours.
Okay.
Yeah.
How well is it understood how the environmental impacts of these technologies will scale? Such as in Alameda County, we had a big problem with birds with the windmills, and then water's been another issue with the flooding at Tetchy Reservoir, for example, and then solar has mining and other things to bring up the components.
Right, well, so every technology has some issues associated with it. Don't want to deny that at all. We think that the issues are much less than corresponding fossil fuel infrastructure. Just to give you an example of the birds, because this is pretty common. So yeah, wind turbines kill birds. I mean, the Bird Conservancy estimates about 500,000 birds per year are killed because of woods. So it sounds like a lot, but they also estimate the same. American Bird Conservancy estimates 10 to 50 million birds are killed by communication towers each year. 1 billion are killed by buildings, and another 3 billion by cats. So it's all relative. Yeah.
On one of your graphs, you showed atmospheric CO2 levels going down. I thought that CO2 kind of stays there forever. Right now, we're at about 410, 412 parts per million. If we stop emitting CO2, is it just going to go away? Doesn't it?
No, it has a lifetime of between 50 to 70 years.
50 to 70 years.
Defaulting lifetime. But if you stop its emissions immediately, then it can only go down slightly. So it's not, it can stay, I mean, the worst it can do is stay constant if it had like an infinite lifetime. If you stop all its emissions, like in this green curve, that's where you just stop everything. So the CO2, if there were an infinite lifetime, then you'd have a flat line, so it wouldn't go up anymore. But because it doesn't have an infinite lifetime, there is CO2 that's coming out right away, because there's stuff that's been in there for 7 years already that's coming out. So that's why it goes down. But it does, take black carbon, which is an aerosol particle from diesel exhaust. That's a particle that has a lifetime of a few weeks. So there, you would see a precipitous drop, going right away. So here you can see this is over 85 years. Those lines are all over 85 years, so it's not dropping right away. It's slowly going down.
Is there anything to these theories, like conspiracy theories? 2 people have told me about chemtrails and weather modification by the government and Air Force report on controlling and manipulating the weather, and it goes contrary to the climate change action we're doing.
Well, okay, so,
Is there anything to this?
well, let me first explain. So chemtrails are what some people say are the contrails that you see from an aircraft, the white kind of cloud that comes out of an aircraft. That's a contrail, but some people call them chemtrails. It's just a way to make it sound like a conspiracy.
Say they're putting chemicals in the air.
So they are, contrails really form. I mean, we actually model, that's one of the things I do is actually model aircraft exhaust and the formation of contrails. So I could actually get a contrail to form just from a computer model. And because you have a certain temperature, you have water vapor coming out of the exhaust, and you have a certain temperature up there in the atmosphere, and then the water, it basically liquefies and freezes when it cools down. But if we go to wind, water, solar, for aircraft, we would have, for the electric aircraft, there'd be no emissions whatsoever, so you'd have no more contrails. For the hydrogen fuel cell aircraft, you would have just water vapor, but less of it than the fossil fuel plane, but you have no other chemicals. So aircraft exhaust does contain other things besides water vapor. It contains oxides of nitrogen, hydrocarbons, soot, black carbon, organic carbon. It contains lots of chemicals. But these are natural, these are the same chemicals that come out of your gasoline or diesel exhaust on the road here. Slight variation, but they're pretty much the same. They're all unhealthy. I mean, so there's nothing healthy about aircraft exhaust. So you don't stand behind an aircraft. So, but they're not, there's no reason to think that, commercial aircraft have been, some additional poison has been added. It's poison enough as it is. So, but having said that, if we go to electric aircraft, we eliminate all contrails. Hydrogen fuel cell, we eliminate all other chemicals except the water vapor, and there'll be fewer, thinner contrails. So,
How are the water wind turbines kept in place and intact so that they're not colliding or crashing, or when the water fluctuates? How do they stay stabilized?
are you doing the tidal turbines under the water, or the wind
No,
turbines
you were talking about the
offshore?
wind turbines that can now float
Oh,
on
the floating
water.
ones.
The float, yeah.
Yeah, so that was the engineering challenge, is to get them so that they wouldn't tip over.
Right, or collide or crash.
Well, they are floating, but there is a wire down to the bottom. So instead of having a pole that goes into the ocean surface, which is really expensive, and you have to drill something, they do have guy wires that kind of keep them a little bit stable. So the wires are still
Like
connected
the
to the bottom.
buoy theory sort of thing?
Well, there are buoys. Yeah, there's spent parts of there's enough buoys to keep them stable. But just for extra assurance, they also have wires in each of these three buoys. I mean, there's three prongs in these things. In each of those prongs, there's a wire that also goes down to the ocean floor and attaches to it, as opposed to a big tower that has to be drilled.
I was concerned to see the floating solar. I was concerned about the marine life underneath, and it looked like it was floating right on the water. Can they suspend it up higher, similar to this, and allow marine life?
I think, well, if they suspended it higher, I think it'd be a lot more costly, is my guess.
Well,
And
but long-term, wouldn't it be costly if we affect eco-environments under the surface?
well, it's possible, but so one idea, first of all, is put solar on aqueducts, for example. So that would prevent evaporation. And you also do prevent evaporation on lakes as well. So in terms of life, there's a little bit of balance because you are shading and creating, but on the other hand, you're reducing sunlight. So
And
that
over every parking lot, perfect.
yeah. Well, so I think, compared to the size of the oceans, if you put it over the oceans, these oceans are so enormous, and the area we need to power a good substantial portion of the Earth is a really trivial portion of the ocean. In that portion, we'd probably reduce phytoplankton growth because they need sunlight. But it's probably a trade-off. So maybe better than fossil fuels, oil spill. Yes.
The presentation won't fall because of this, but Nevada City is not in Nevada, it's near Sacramento.
Well,
What percentage of the world's energy sources are coming from WWS now? You might have addressed this already.
No, I didn't address it. Right now, it's, I mean, well, if you count hydro is a pretty good portion of electricity, but I'm thinking of all energy. If you include hydro, I think we're on the order of 12%, 10%, 12%, but hydro is like 6% of that, 6%, so maybe 5% of wind plus solar. Just,
So you have about, 85, 90% more to go.
yeah, we have a huge way to go.
And very soon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, right away. Yes,
Yeah, 40 years ago.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was a really nice presentation, and I think it's very uplifting to hear that there are these possibilities after hearing Guy McPherson's talk, which is a little more depressing. What my question is really, how can we help you scientists get your message out there? What can we do to help this? And the other thing I just wanted to add to that question is all these beautiful options for alternatives. I think we also have to rewrite the story for humanity, because these aren't addressing things like impact on environment, habitat destruction, overpopulation. So I think we should all get together and be writing this new story together as well. Like hydroelectric, I live up in Seattle, and that's created a lot of problems for the fish. And they're actually trying to take dams down rather than, continuing this particular sort of production of electricity.
Yeah, so clearly we want to address all areas of the environment, and even the hydro, that's why we say we're not growing it, we're just trying to use existing, and then eventually we can, once we get everything else in place, then we can even dismantle that.
Thank you.
But what can people do? Well, there's really three ways we can solve this problem that all work together. One is, well, of course, economics is helping right now, getting a lot of wind and solar and batteries in place. But policies need to be put in place, and then individuals can do a lot on their own in their homes and their own lives. So those are kind of the three areas, and then the Sierra Club works a lot on policies and getting policies put in place, and that's really helpful maybe. But also getting information out, what people can do. I mean, you're welcome to spread this presentation out to more people, and yeah, I have lots of other information.
So is that something you can send to us?
Right on, sure.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
It's kind of a geeky thing, but Tim Garrett's thermodynamics of civilization, he did a correlation of carbon consumption and the size of the economy. Have you studied that and like run this information against that position?
Not specifically. I mean, we get all our data from the International Energy Agency for this 139 countries study, and they account for all the energy, but we haven't specifically compared with
Yeah, it's an interesting paper. It's called No Way Out. He's a cloud physicist, and Guy McPherson brought that up. But it's a real close coupling of carbon consumption and the size of the economy. So this is pointing in a different way because it's clean consumption, different from dirty consumption. But there's never existed clean consumption before. So it's moving into
that's
that.
what we're shooting for.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's next for you? More refinements of this? Are you gonna? I mean, you're not a foe of controversy and stuff. Political office?
But while we're working right now, we're trying to finish these city and town plans, and so that's kind of the next step. There's a lot of refinement. I mean, unfortunately, we have to update these things because the data becomes stale after a while.
You consult with like a city, if the city says, what do we do with something? And we say, well, you can talk to Jacobson. Would that be a thing that happens?
Well, what was happening was we're getting a lot of cities saying, do you have a plan for us? I said, no. But then we thought, well, why not try to develop plans? And then, so we did work with the city of Palo Alto initially, and then lots of other cities came by and said they're interested in it. Jody Van Horn of the Sierra Club also is really asking us to, because the Sierra Club is working a lot with cities and a lot of plans, so we started
Okay.
working.
Well, thank you.
Presumably, this is all related to the human contribution to the greenhouse effect, and how do you factor into that, naturally occurring, carbons and, weather, related
Well-
things, forest fires? How does that factor into the balance?
Well, we're not looking at climate change per se, except for that one graphic. We're really just looking at how to get rid of the emissions that we can control.
That we actually have control over, right?
Yeah, so in the energy infrastructure in particular. There are also additional emissions that are not in the energy infrastructure, such as open biomass burning, human-related, and methane release from cows and waste.
Yeah.
So those can also have to be addressed too. But we're just trying to control all the emissions that we can control.
Can lasers produce rain? I bet there's some other things somebody told me about. And I looked it up, it said there's a laser 7 feet long produces water or something.
Well, I don't know about. Yeah.
Yep. What about global dimming or aerosol masking? Have you addressed that issue? In other words, once we stop emitting heat and energy from coal-fired power plants, for example, the particulate matter, which is spewed into the atmosphere, will then fall back down to Earth, and there will be a massive influx of solar radiation. In other words, this particulate matter, as you're aware, serves as a kind of umbrella, and actually, even though it's warming us, at the same time, it is protecting us to an extent from solar radiation. Is that going to be a problem once we get rid of all of these carbon-based fuels?
Yeah, so right now, half of global warming is being masked by cooling aerosol pollution particles. And keep in mind, aerosol particles, most of them are cooling particles, but they're also warming particles, black carbon and brown carbon, dark stuff. But because if we got rid of all particles today, global warming would double immediately, which is pretty scary. So that's why our solution is really, we want to get rid of the warming particles and the greenhouse gases, but we also want to get rid of the cooling particles because of the health problems associated with them. 90% of all those mortalities are due to particles, cooling particles and warming particles. So we're trying to solve both problems. So we do have to get rid of all the particles, but that's why we get rid of the greenhouse gases simultaneously. So there will be a slight bump in the temperature initially, but then it'll stabilize. But that's the only way we can do it. Eventually, it's not a good idea to artificially put pollution particles in the air. They have so many possible potential impacts on the stratospheric ozone layer, on the composition of rainwater, tropospheric chemistry. This geoengineering of the atmosphere is really a sideshow. I think we just focus on getting rid of the emissions. It's the best we can do. All right. Thank you.
All right.